On October 18, 1879, the Severn Tunnel work struck water where water had no business being manageable. A great freshwater inflow entered the westward heading from Old Pit, and within 24 hours, filled the connected workings to tide water level. This was not the Severn estuary breaking through. The water came from underground on the Welsh side. But under a tunnel being driven beneath the estuary, fresh water could be just as final. The episode that followed has often been told as a clean rescue. A diver named Alexander Lambert went into a flooded heading with an early breathing apparatus, reached a door, and brought the works back under control. He did reach the door. He did close it and work its sluice. But that was not the same thing as ending the source. The lasting answer to the Severn Tunnel was stranger and more demanding. Engineers had to give the water somewhere else to go, then keep taking it away. That distinction is still visible in the railway's ordinary life. Network Rail says Sudbrook Pumping Station continuously removes millions of gallons of spring water to keep the tunnel operational. In June 2026, after an overhead line upgrade was completed, trains were running through the tunnel again. A passenger can cross beneath the Severn without seeing the arrangement that makes the journey possible. The water has not become a legend. It has become work. The tunnel had been under construction since 1873. Its intended line ran beneath one of Britain's most difficult stretches of water, linking South Wales and England. The ordinary picture of a tunnel is a hole made through something solid. Severn was never that simple. The men driving it had to contend with ground, shafts, ventilation, tidal conditions, and a landscape already threaded by older workings. Then the Great Spring entered the story. Thomas A. Walker, the contractor, later described the flood in a detail that matters. The water did not merely seep through a wall or make the floor unpleasant. It poured into the western heading from Old Pit and filled the workings connected with it. Within a day, those spaces had water up to tide water level. A place made for drilling, hauling, bricking, and moving men had become a submerged system of passages. Tide water level is an easy phrase to mishear. It does not change the source into seawater. Walker called the inflow fresh, and later engineering accounts placed the Great Spring on the Welsh side. The distinction matters because it removes a false picture of the estuary simply tearing open the tunnel roof. The danger came from beneath the land, from water already moving through ground the project had to enter. That made the flood harder to reduce to a single damaged spot. The water had found the connected workings. To reopen one part of the construction, the builders needed more than a wall in front of them. They needed a way to recover drainage control through a system now filled with water. The obstacle was not a mysterious force. It was a physical network of passages, a source feeding it, and an operation interrupted at the point where every underground task depends on access. There is one small mercy in the account, and it should be kept as small as the record keeps it. Men changing shifts were warned. They got out through Iron Pit. Walker reported that no lives were lost in that inundation. That does not settle the human cost of the whole project, and it does not turn the flood into a harmless event. It tells us exactly what the surviving account can say. On that day, people had a route out before the water closed it. That narrowness is part of the story's discipline. Old work sites invite invention because their gaps are so large. It would be easy to populate the heading with a made-up crew, to put wages in their pockets, or to turn every flooded passage into a death scene. The sources used here do not support that. They preserve a shift change, a warning, an escape route, a contractor's account, a named diver, and later evidence of worker housing at Sudbrook. The rest must remain an absence rather than a costume. The escape did not solve the problem waiting below. The work had been interrupted by something that could not be argued with or bribed into stopping. Every later decision began with a hard physical fact, a passage that was supposed to carry people, material, and eventually trains, had become part of the water's path. More than a year separated the October 1879 inundation from Lambert's successful operation in November 1880. That span is worth noticing without filling it with invented drama. The source was not a brief interruption that yielded to the next shift. It was a construction problem that survived long enough to demand different equipment, repeated attempts, and a decision about where the work itself could safely regain a hold. It is tempting, from a safe distance, to imagine that a tunnel builder simply blocks a leak. Close the opening. Put up more brick. Pump out what has arrived. That was tried in forms that made sense at the time. The trouble was access. A door and sluice lay in a flooded heading, and until someone could reach them, the builders could not use them to regain drainage control. The account of that attempt has a very particular obstacle in it. A conventional diving hose, 1,000 feet long, could not be dragged near enough to the door. The length that seemed like the solution was the thing that defeated it. In a submerged, obstructed heading, the hose became unworkable before the diver reached the job. Henry Fluss had developed a hose-free apparatus that carried compressed oxygen in a knapsack. It was new enough that no one should treat it as a magic suit from a later age. Its value in this case was brutally practical. It freed a diver from the long hose that could not get through. Fluss made attempts with his own apparatus. After those attempts did not complete the task, Lambert used it. The apparatus did not make the flooded heading ordinary. It changed one constraint. A diver no longer had to drag the failing hose all the way to the door. That difference is the kind engineers and workers recognize immediately. Not a miracle, not a guarantee, just one impossible part of a job becoming physically reachable. The record is careful enough to show the value of the tool without asking us to imagine that the danger had become routine. Walker identifies Lambert as the leading diver. The surviving description gives us actions, not a speech or a private revelation. Lambert went down the shaft and into the flooded heading toward the watertight door. There were no cameras underground. There is no honest way to supply a brave last line, a pulse of panic, or a thought that crossed his mind in the dark. What the record does give is enough. The job was real, the route was submerged, and the equipment had to work where the hose had failed. On November 10, 1880, Lambert reached the door. He lowered the flap valve. He removed the second rail. He closed the door. Then he turned the sluice valve rod. Walker recorded him as absent for 80 minutes. Those details are not there to make a legend out of one man. They show the scale of the act. Before pumps and drainage could do their work again, someone had to make a sequence of mechanical changes inside a flooded passage. For a moment, that looks like the whole story. A door has been shut. A sluice has been operated. The thing that kept the tunnel from being a tunnel has been put behind a barrier. It is the kind of ending old engineering stories like to offer. One skilled person goes where no one else can go, does the impossible job, and returns the world to its proper shape. Severn does not permit that ending. Lambert's action helped make dewatering possible. It restored control over a piece of the flooded works. It did not erase the Great Spring from the ground. The same construction record that preserves the dive also preserves later water problems, fissures, pressure, and a flow that still had to be dealt with. A closed door can separate a space from water. It cannot make the water cease to exist. That difference changes the scale of the question. If the problem is one door, the solution belongs to the person who reaches the door. If the problem is a continuing underground flow, the solution belongs to a larger arrangement. Where the water is intercepted, where it is allowed to travel, what receives it, and who maintains the machinery after the immediate emergency has passed. Lambert's work remains essential. It simply cannot be asked to carry a claim the evidence does not make. That is why the most important decision in this story was not made at the door. Sir John Hawkshaw, the engineer associated with the later response, chose to drive a side heading north of the main tunnel line to intercept the spring. The move was not a bigger version of sealing a breach. It accepted that the water had a path through the ground and set out to catch that path before it reached the place meant for trains. Picture the change physically. Instead of demanding that the Great Spring vanish inside the main tunnel, the builders drove another passage to meet it. The side heading was about 40 feet north of the tunnel center line. When it intercepted the water, the flow could be led into that separate route. The main tunnel was left nearly dry, not because the spring had been defeated in a single contest, but because its destination had been changed. This is the point at which the earlier rescue takes on a different meaning. Lambert's door was necessary because the works needed a way back into drainage control. But the enduring solution did not depend on one door holding forever. It depended on a new route, then on pipes and pumps arranged to receive what that route carried. The source was no longer treated as an intruder that could be expelled. It was treated as a permanent condition that had to be engineered around. That may sound less dramatic than a diver closing a door in a flooded heading. It is more demanding. A final victory asks for one moment of success. A managed flow asks for a system that will go on succeeding. Every pipe, pump, shaft, and maintenance decision becomes part of the answer. The burden has not disappeared. It has been moved, named, and given machinery. The historical account uses the confident language of its era and speaks of the spring being mastered. The physical description underneath that language is more useful. The water was intercepted. It was diverted into the side heading. Pipes and pumps took it from there. Pressure did not vanish from the story. It was given an organized route out of it. That is a more exact kind of mastery, and a more honest one. By 1886, the permanent pumping works were coming into service. The first engine and pump began operating that summer, and goods traffic opened through the tunnel later that year. The construction had not reached its end because the ground finally yielded. It reached a usable state because the railway and the water had been assigned different paths. That is a very specific kind of completion. The tunnel could now serve its purpose without pretending that the spring had ceased to be part of the place. The side heading and pumping works turned an interruption in construction into a permanent operating condition. A project can be finished in that sense. The structure is ready for use, while the condition that once threatened it has been built into the work required to keep using it. Sudbrook became part of that arrangement. The site included housing for construction workers, and a permanent pumping station was erected there to drain the tunnel. Those facts leave a real human footprint. They also mark a limit in the archive available here. It does not establish a complete payroll, a typical shift, a reliable project-wide injury count, or the full number of lives lost during construction. The absence of those records is not permission to invent the missing people. What can be followed is the labor that survives in the documents. Men changing shifts receive a warning and leave through iron pit. A named diver is sent toward a door after a hose cannot reach it. An engineer decides that the water must be intercepted rather than merely held back. Workers' housing rises at Sudbrook beside a station built to keep water out of the railway. None of this needs a composite hero. The record already shows people being placed inside a problem that had changed the terms of their work. There is a cost in the engineering answer itself. It is easy to admire a structure after its crisis has been made invisible. The tunnel is dry where trains must pass, because another part of the system has accepted the wet work. The solution did not remove the need for effort. It created a particular kind of effort that would have to be renewed as equipment aged, and the railway changed around it. Network Rail's account of Sudbrook makes the modern version plain. The pumps there were renewed in 2022, The station has 14 pumps, and each is lifted through a shaft about 60 meters deep. These are not decorative details attached to an old miracle. They belong to a working installation whose purpose is still to remove the spring water that the 19th century builders could not honestly wish out of the ground. The language around large infrastructure often makes it sound finished once the last brick is laid and the first train passes. Severn offers a quieter correction. The tunnel opened, traffic moved, steam-driven pumps eventually gave way to electric ones. Equipment was replaced. The work changed shape, but the original bargain remained. Trains could have their route beneath the estuary only if the water had another route and someone kept it moving. The bargain is not a failure of the original builders. It is the achievement they actually left behind. They did not promise a dry mountain or a defeated spring. They made a railway possible in ground that would not become simple. Their answer was durable precisely because it did not rest on the flattering fiction that one hard-won intervention had made further work unnecessary. That is why the 2026 reopening matters, though it is not a grand finale. Network Rail reported on June 9th that its overhead line upgrade had been completed, and train services were running through Severn Tunnel again. The news concerns wires and rail operations, not the Great Spring. Yet it confirms the larger fact: a line that was once flooded from within is still functioning, because the old water problem was turned into an operating responsibility, rather than a vanished chapter. There is no need to make the spring into a villain. Water followed fractures and pressure in the ground. The builders were not defeated by a malicious force, nor did they conquer one. They learned piece by piece that the question could not be answered by the gesture everyone wants from a disaster story: close the breach and call the danger over. The harder answer was visible in the sequence. First, regain access to a flooded heading. Then close the door and work the sluice. Then admit that the door is not the whole answer. Drive a side heading. Catch the flow. Lead it away. Put it into pipes. Keep pumps between the spring and the railway. Each step changed what the next step could accomplish. None of them made the ground forget what it was doing. Today, the passenger sees the completed side of that bargain: a tunnel, a train, a crossing beneath the Severn. Elsewhere, at Sudbrook, the other half remains below and beside that ordinary journey. Pumps continue to lift water from a source found by men who expected to be making a railway. The dry line is the visible result. The water route is the truth beneath it.